This is an RX 580. It's used the same GPU as the previous year's RX 480. The same chip, just with a slight change in numbering. It's Polaris 20 now rather than 10. It even has the same 2304 shaders, 144 TMUs and 32 ROPs, if you want to go that deep into the specs. What was different now though was the manufacturing process had gotten a lot more refined in the year since the 480 came out. Why that necessitated a new code name, I don't know. Bigger number equals better for marketing, I suppose. It did technically perform better than the 480 did, with a boost clock speed 74 MHz higher than the previous card. But that meant you could just overclock the 480 to match the 580's performance. You gained nothing from buying it if you already had last year's chip. This is the 8GB Sapphire Pulse version of the card I have in for testing today, which does have a slightly higher core clock than the standard 580, so it should technically perform better than that does. I never actually had an RX 580 myself, so there's no nostalgia around it for me. I know there is for a number of you watching right now. The aim is to see how it does in 2026, so I will be testing the most intense games, but the most popular games today, some of which may be from around the time it came out. But as they're still quite popular today, they are still a valid test, I would say. Before that though, the thermal paste on this RX 580 has never been changed before. It's actually still got its warranty void if removed stickers on the back of it. So we're going to sort that out first. It looks like it's a simple enough card to take apart. I think it's just these 4 screws retaining the PCB, and then there's some screws here, here, here and here, holding the PCB onto the plastic shroud around the heatsink. Let's get these off first, the 4 screws holding the PCB on. There isn't really much torque needed to get these off, so it wasn't being held onto the heatsink too well by the factory. Let's get the 4 screws off. I think I was holding the PCB onto the actual plastic shroud surrounding the heatsink. I think this is the last one holding the PCB onto the plastic shroud. I'm just going to separate now. Or have I just taken the plastic shroud off the heatsink? Yes, okay, I'm not as much of an idiot as I thought I was. I did have to take the plastic shroud off as well as the heatsink itself. I left a couple of screws in which I didn't think needed to actually be unscrewed. Nice. This has a thermal pad sinking heat from the inductors into the backplate. That's sneaky. There's a hidden screw underneath the backplate, right here. We have heatsink liberation at last. Yeah, this has definitely got the original thermal paste on it. It's dry as a dry thing. It's not in a good condition at all. Let's get this cleaned up and put back together. Once the card had been cleaned up, repasted and put back into the test PC, the latest drivers were installed. These were 26.1.1 at the time. Considering its age now, I decided to give the 580 the best chance I could and overclock it. They were already heavily power limited with how much voltage they ran from the factory, so undervolting got the most extra performance instead. A quick 100 mV undervolt across the board, and turning the memory up as high as it could go, got us 5039 points in time spy with a graphics score of 4592. The first game I want to try out is Fallout 4. This is 1080p at maximum settings, with no depth of field, motion blur or lens flares, just for personal preference. This was a game released before the RX 480 was even out, but it has gotten harder to run since then, especially with the anniversary update. There were no hitches or stuttering of any kind, and the 580 even averaged almost 120 frames per second. The high 60s being the lowest it drops in and around the trees between Vault 111 and Sanctuary. This is of course with the high FPS fix installed. You need this if you're running the game above 60 FPS, otherwise the physics go haywire. The card performs so well in fact that I'm sure 1440p wouldn't be an issue either. BeamNG Drive is an interesting one. It's been around for a while now, but it is played by a lot of people. It's also technically still in alpha, so performance can be poorer than expected and vary quite wildly across different hardware. The jungle is probably the most intense map in the game, but the 580 handles it relatively easily. It can't quite manage a steady 60 FPS overall, but it can get pretty close at 1080p with the high preset. The usual settings are also disabled for personal preference: bloom, motion blur, and depth of field. The frame times are quite smooth though. There aren't any hitches or stuttering throughout. Areas of the jungle have frame rates in the mid-40s. These were the muddy, off-road areas with dense trees and vegetation. Even then, things remained quite steady and playable. Counter-Strike 2, whilst relatively easy to run, being an early 2010s game on a slightly newer engine, is currently the most played game on Steam as I'm making this, having almost triple the number of players than the next game down. There's been a number of updates since I ran the 580 through this. It was around mid-April I did these tests, but performance should still be about the same as what you're seeing. A little bit better, if anything, as Valve continue to improve the new animation system. The 580 never had any issues with CS2, even at 1080p with the very high preset, averaging 130 FPS on the nuke map. Smoke grenades would cause frame rates to drop into the 80s, but combat otherwise stayed around 100. Realistically, you're not using these settings if you're playing competitively, but it does at least show what it can still do. HDR quality on anything other than low would cause random freezes for a brief amount of time. Performance otherwise stayed the same, so I'm not sure what's going on there. The last game I want to try is the enhanced edition of GTA 5. This is also still a very popular game, especially since the update came out. This brought with it a raft of visual improvements, including ray tracing. However, 580 has no support for that, but it still looks pretty good nonetheless. This is also 1080p with the very high preset. I had to try playing around with some settings to keep the frame rate above 60 throughout the inner city. Just changing shadow quality to high did the trick, giving us back around 10 to 15 frames per second. Now there's nothing wrong with the original game. In fact, it still looks pretty good and performs way better than this. The 580 could quite easily manage 1440p, for example. The main improvement that actually mattered is the online mode. In the original game, performance would just fall apart once you were in a lobby with over 16 players, a limitation of the game's netcode, but the enhanced edition has no such problem. So I still really like the RX 580. As someone who never actually had one before, it still seems like a reasonably decent card. It runs a lot of today's most popular games more than well enough to be playable and competitive, especially in the likes of CS2, for example. It runs quiet, it runs cool, with an undervolt at be round about 130 to 140 watts power draw at most, and it's got plenty of memory as well. That's plenty for 1080p today and even some higher resolutions in those most popular games. And for more intense games, it's technologies like FSR are fantastic for older cards like these. I'll have a quick check actually, see what you can get for second hand. Yeah, let's maybe not do that again because that was £75. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend buying this for £75. There's got to be better options on the second hand market for that price. There has to be. Now I'm aware this also hasn't been the most in-depth look at the RX 580. This is more just to kind of basically just satisfy my curiosity at what an 8GB RX 580 is still capable of about a decade or so after it came out. If you check out Budget Build's official's video on the RX 580, he does a pretty good job at going into a lot of detail about the 580 itself as well. But yeah, I've probably taken up enough of your time now, so thanks for watching and thank you for your time.